Yeah.
Who's this?
Anyway,
Hey, what's going on right now? How you
change
doing,
it, but,
Good, good.
I mean, if they would spend the night now, I would think their parents would want
All right, get the slide in. Thank you.
Make sure I got it.
No,
Yeah.
sir. They have it in.
same people cheering.
How you been doing, all right? Good. That's our council. I stopped council right there. That shows you right there. Yes, it's a lot.
Yes, there is. You can't get a better example.
All right, good evening, everybody. We're going to begin in about 30 seconds. If you want to silence your phones, turn them off. Council members, please make sure that your mics are on. We are live. Thank you. All right, today is April 11th, 2022. This will be a regular legislative meeting tonight. Before we begin, we're going to hop into the committee meetings for this evening, and City Properties and Parks and Recreation will kick it off with Mr. Jaber.
Thank you, Mr. President. City Properties Park and Recreation meeting April 11th, 2022 at 6 o'clock, council chambers. Members present. We have Thomas Heidig and Ms. Carol Fry and myself as chairman. Our council members also present. We have topics of discussion. We have number one, we have a letter from the mayor judge requesting legislation to sell a property located at 635 Norton Avenue, parcels 0106960, 0106961, 0106962, and 0106963. A sales agreement is forthcoming. Since no responses to previous issued RFP and no serious offers have been received, emergency warning and one reading is requested so the prospective buyer can be developing this property. Opening this up.
Jim?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Do we have a sale price for this combined?
I'd like to wait until, we have an attorney working on the sales agreement right now. That should be done. I was anticipating that it would be done late last week. It has not come through yet, but that'll be included in it. So I prefer one reading and emergency wording, but if it should come in this week, but if it takes longer, then we'll go 2 readings. I'd like to just have that a part of it, because if I can say something now, then it can change. So I need to make sure it's all finalized in the agreement, and both parties agree to it before I say something that could very well change.
Because my only concern was the 4 parcels, when I looked them up on the county audit card, came to a total of 1,900 and, 1,000, I'm bad today. $194,850 valued combined. And I just want to make sure that we're not giving it away if the values are at that. So that's my only concern with that.
And so when we sell property on the commercial side, there's a lot of factors that go into it. What kind of jobs are coming, what kind of payroll, what's the land going to be used for? Are they asking for any tax incentives? So, it's kind of a trade-off. So, once we have that agreement, we want to go through all that, because that agreement will include any tax incentives and things like that.
Thank you.
Mrs. Thompson, who's the business that you said for that parcel is coming out? Was it, were we allowed to say who the business was?
Is this the Barberton
Barberton.
Tree property?
And I think if we move forward with this, because I would hate to see them lose those guys, because it'd be great for the city and the income coming to the city. They do very, very well for tax revenue. So I'm comfortable with I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, finish what you're saying. You're the
I'm
chair.
comfortable with emergency reading on this one, just because I said just for the business itself, Barberton Tree. And I said just for the great income it's going to bring to the city.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, all in all, the buyer of this property, everybody knows him very well, and he's always been Barbertonian, and to bring part of his business, or bring his business back into Barberton. When he started the area, we didn't have the area for that. Very reputable, and I think that in my opinion, regardless of if we're going to lose any money or not, it's bringing a Barbertonian, born and raised here, his business here, his whole life, into our town, and being able, to visualize that and see that. I don't think, knowing that family, I don't think that they're going to try to cheat the city. I think they'll be very reasonable with their request in that, and I have full confidence in that company that has been for how many years? I don't even know, 50 years or 60 years, and bringing them visually into our town. I think that's going to be a plus.
Mr. President?
Thank you, Chair. Is the number of jobs and annual revenue able to be shared?
I'm not sure, and to tell you the truth, though, I can't recall the exact figures.
85 approximate jobs?
I thought it was between 65 to 75. Yep.
Mr. Trevor Hunt?
That's good.
That's correct. That's what the applicant stated at the planning commission meeting.
Between 65 and 70?
60 to 75, I believe. Yeah.
Was there annual revenue given at that meeting?
I want to say that's it.
It's, yeah, if we don't know. I mean, I've seen it, I didn't know if we could share it or not.
Yeah. Any other questions, council members, or remarks? Yes, sir, Mr. Wood.
Just to let you know, I saw the plans from the planning commission. He's going to spend a boatload of money including sidewalks down here. So there is a retention pond, and it's going to be nice fencing. He's going to put trees around there. He's going to spend a boatload of money.
Can I get a motion for this, please?
I'll make a motion for
Mrs.
this.
Fry?
I will second that.
And the vote, please.
Aye.
Motion carried. All right. Letter from Don Patterson, Director of Parks and Recreation, requesting legislation to approve the Park Department to enter into contract with National Auto Fleet Group to purchase of $99,536.66 from the ARPA funds. The money will be used to purchase a light transit bus for usage with Parks and Recreation Department, programming and other programs as needed. Emergency boarding, and one reading requested to meet bid deadline. Yes, sir, Mr.
Thank you, sir. Director, is this bus one of the handicapped accessible ones?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
To replace the one that we have is in pretty bad shape. I mean, we've taken probably past 15,000 years. Gauges are always flashing. I mean, it's on its last leg.
Are you gonna trade that one in, or are you gonna sell it
Not
outright?
with this deal, we may be able to, but not with this contract.
Thank you.
Current van is probably over 20 years old. And then there's several passenger vans, which I don't think they even make those types of passenger vans anymore. You know, bench seating.
Yeah, the E350.
Ms. Angela?
Is this a 2022 or 2023? You have to order it?
It's a 6 to 12 month order. It'll be an order, so hopefully we'll have it next year by this time.
So it'll be a 2022?
Yes.
Any other concerns or questions or remarks? All right, motion for this, please.
I'll make a motion there.
Mr. Heidig,
I'll second that.
Mrs. Fry. Vote, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. All right, we have pending draft legislation, ordinance number 50-2022, title into contract with Tim Lally Chevrolet, an ordinance authorizing the city of Barberton to enter into contract with Tim Lally Chevrolet in the amount of $52,185.82 for the purchase of the 2023 Chevy Silverado 3500 dump truck to be used for general parks maintenance issues and declaring an emergency. Any remarks or questions? All right. Seeing none remarks on that one. And open this up for miscellaneous discussion, please. Ms. Colburn?
I wondered if we had any idea what we're going to do about the swans, if anything.
Yeah, I don't know if everyone knows, but we put them back out there about 3 weeks ago. Last Thursday, the wild ones came in and they scared ours off the lake, and they actually were jumping on the one. Luckily, Tammy was down there. I went over, we were keeping them, every time ours went on the lake, they came flying over attacking them. So we had the breeder come get them. He recommended keeping them until after breeding season, when they'll be less aggressive. I don't know if it's the same pair, but the breeder has swan. Well, he had swans in Medina, and they killed a male over there, and he had to take the female out of there. So we're gonna try to get them back out after breeding season. There's a few things that he suggested. He suggested maybe building a pen somewhere where we can keep them just in case they fly in. I don't know. It's times change. I don't know. DNR has reintroduced the wild ones that are flying in because they're native to this area. So this may be a reoccurring problem, and we may have to take a step back and look at what we're doing with the swans. But right now, the plan is to get them back out after mating season another month. So.
We might have to get some plastic ones, huh? Thank you for getting them off before they
Those
were
Christmas
hurt.
light ones.
Yeah.
Put the Christmas light ones back out in the
I
lake.
did get with a company, they're actually gonna put feed machines around the lake for us. That way people aren't feeding bread and things they should be eating.
Right.
So just trying to make them more comfortable. They're only 2 years old. The ones that were there, they were a lot bigger.
Right.
They couldn't stand a chance. So I talked to the breeder about older ones, and he's like, the pricing of them are like through the roof because they produce the babies, which are called cygnets. So they have some value. So hopefully we can get through maybe through this year, and they get a little bit bigger, and they can fend for themselves a little bit better.
Thank you again. Thank you for getting them off before it was too late.
Yes.
I just wanted to comment, I took my 3-year-old to the Easter egg hunt at the lake, and yes, the weather was not the best, but it was a great, it was awesome. You know, it was easy. He's little, he's 3. The eggs were nice and laid out. He got his 12. He had a great time. The churches that were a part of it, that was great too. He just had a ball, so it was wonderful. Yes.
Staff worked hard on it.
No, it was wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. Any other remarks or questions? Valerie? All right. Motion to adjourn, please.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Ms. Fry,
I will second that.
Mr. Heide. And we are adjourned, sir, at 6:12. With that, I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Jaber. Next up is Public Welfare and Safety with Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is Monday, April 11th. The time is 6:12 p.m. We are in council chambers. All members of the committee are present, as well as all council members and guests as noted on my agenda sheet. We have just one request for legislation this evening, and it is a letter from Captain Steve Iono, the acting fire chief, and he is requesting legislation appropriating $2,000 from the unappropriated item of the Fire Prevention Education Fund to the operating and maintenance budget of the Fire Prevention and Education Fund for the purchase of public education supplies. Emergency wording is requested, and this will be referred to finance. Does anyone have any questions about this? No? Okay, do I have a motion to call for this?
I'll make that motion.
Motion made by Mrs. Coburn. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Griffin. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
It passes unanimously. We have a couple of pieces of legislation that are pending, and we'll be voting on them tonight. The first is a commendation for Captain Richard A. Schwenning, a resolution of the Council of the City of Barberton to honor and give public recognition to Captain Richard A. Schwenning for his 33 years of dedicated service to this city as a member of the Barberton Fire Department. Any comments on this piece of legislation? No.
We also have ordinance number 49-2022, which is titled Fireworks, an ordinance addressing the provisions of amended substitute House Bill 172 concerning the right of municipalities to retain the regulations and prohibitions on the discharge, ignition, and exploding of fireworks that existed prior to the enactment of amended substitute House Bill 172 and declaring an emergency. Any comments on this particular piece of legislation? No. Does anyone have any miscellaneous discussion for public welfare and safety? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion made by Mr. Griffin
I'll second.
and seconded by Mrs. Coburn, and we are adjourned at 6:14 PM. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Fry. Next up, Rules, Marketing, and Development with Mr. Griffin.
Thank you, Mr. President. Rules Marketing and Development today is April 11th, time 6:15. I'd like to call this meeting to order. We are meeting in council chambers. All members are present and all others noted. Tonight, we have no requests for legislation. Do we have any miscellaneous discussion from the body or from members of council? Hearing none, do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
I will second that.
Thank you, Mr. Heidick. We're adjourned at 6:16.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. Next up, City Utilities with Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to call the city utilities to order at 6:16 PM. We are in council chambers. All members are present and others as noted. We have no requested legislation at this time. Pending legislation is the utility assessment delinquent water, an ordinance authorizing and directing the city of Barberton to certify to the Summit County Auditor special assessments against certain properties for unpaid utility services, which will include accounts more than 60 days past due and will include charges through August 26, 2022. We'll be voting on that one tonight. Does anybody have anything to say about that? Okay, I'll open it for miscellaneous discussion for utilities. Anyone? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn? Mrs. Fry?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second that motion.
And thank you, Erica. We are adjourned at 6:17.
Thank you, Mrs. Coburn. Next up is Finance and Personnel with Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. Finance and Personnel is April 11th, 2022, 6:17 in council chambers. The committee is present, which consists of Councilors Coburn, Thompson, and President Greer, myself as chair. All other council members and guests noted. First, we have a request for legislation that's been referred from safety. Letter from Captain Stephen Iono, Acting Fire Chief, requesting legislation appropriating $2,000 from the unappropriated item of the Fire Prevention Education Fund to the operating and maintenance budget of the Fire Prevention and Education Fund for the purchase of public education supplies. Emergency wording is requested. Any comments that Councilor Fry didn't go over? All right. Do I have a motion to call for this?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We have a letter from Lisa Kolish-Miller, the Law Director, requesting legislation to appropriate $12,917 from the unappropriated item of the Law Enforcement Trust Fund to the Law Department's Operation and Maintenance budget of the Law Enforcement Trust Fund. Emergency wording requested. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, do I have a motion to call for this?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you. Those in favor?
Aye.
Our pending legislation is ordinance number 41, 2022, create new fund, One Ohio Fund, an ordinance authorizing the Director of Finance to create a new fund, the One Ohio Fund, and declaring an emergency. Any questions or comments? Moving on. Ordinance 46, 2022.
45?
45.
Oh, I had my hand over. I thought I was turning the page. So yes, ordinance 45, 2022. Title, enter into contract Summit County, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a 5-year contract with Summit County for renewal of the Matrix Prosecutor Case Management System contract in the amount of $81,600 or $16,320 a year. I did speak with Director Miller. We are going to amend it to add the emergency language there.
Okay.
Any comments?
Yeah, glad to hear you got that.
Now I can see as I turn the page. Ordinance 46, 2022, title Settlement Agreement, an ordinance requesting retroactive approval legislation to enter into a settlement agreement with Giant Eagle Pharmacy and declaring an emergency. Any comments? Ordinance number 47, 2022, title rescinding ordinance number 32, 2022, an ordinance rescinding ordinance 32, 2022, titled Appropriation American Rescue and declaring an emergency. Any comments? Put my hand lower on the page so I don't miss this. Ordinance 48, 2022, title Non-Bargaining Personnel Policy, an ordinance amending ordinance number 173, 2017 to achieve parity with the bargaining units for personal days and holidays and declaring an emergency. Any comments there? Ordinance 51, 2022, title Transfer American Rescue Plan, an ordinance transferring $1 million from the operations and maintenance budget to the personal service budget within the American Rescue Plan Grant Fund and declaring an emergency. Any comments? Okay. Ordinance number 52, 2022, titled Transfer American Rescue Plan, an ordinance transferring $8,743,003 from the capital budget to the personal service budget within the American Rescue Plan Grant Fund and declaring an emergency. Any comments there? Counselor?
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask Jeremy, have you gotten together your list yet of the restricted items that can be used? I mean, that cannot be used for this fund?
The mayor's working on it.
The mayor's working on that. We'll have it before we vote, or
Well,
we're voting
on
tonight,
this,
but,
Then we'll come to council in a separate piece of legislation to, one, to get council approval to classify the reimbursement of the general fund. We'll ask for council permission for that
okay.
before I do anything. And then we'll also, at the same time, ask for the restrictions put in place. So.
Okay, thank you.
But by moving this money, if it goes for a vote tonight, you are restricted in personnel. And removing it from operations and maintenance, which has its own restrictions, you can't use that for personnel. Moving it to personnel keeps it in the same fund, but it's still restricted. Now you can't use that for operations and maintenance.
Okay,
But there are still restrictions, but they're already clearly defined.
okay,
And they're not unique to this funding source.
okay.
Counselor?
Just stop and think. $9 million we transferred.
Mhm.
That's unbelievable. That's a lot of money.
Well, South Van Buren is going to look mighty nice.
Yes, it will. It certainly will.
Any other comments? With nothing else, is there any miscellaneous discussion?
Chair.
Mr. President?
Thanks, Chair. Will you guys be amending ordinance 45, 2022 in committee?
We have to do that on the floor, don't we, since it was already called, or?
On the floor.
Way, but to keep it in the minutes, I would do the actual vote of the entire council on the floor.
We'll do it on the floor.
Mhm.
But as long as your whole committee agrees to this.
Yeah, we'll do it on the floor.
Mhm. Right, and the approval, the last thing on here, on my agenda is the approval of the financial report for the month of March 2022. I was absent during the presentation for it, so
No, we haven't done it yet.
I thought you said,
No,
No, he
for
was
the
talking
acceptance of the,
oh, for the acceptance.
correct.
Ah, well, without further ado, Director Flaker, the floor is yours.
All right, starting with the health insurance fund for March. The revenues for the month were almost $416,000, expenditures at $334,000, gives us an unexpended fund balance of $1,493,000. Our net year-to-date is a positive $74,000. Moving on to the income tax fund. Our estimate for the month of March was just over $902,000. We collected just shy of $845,000. Makes us, for the year, over our estimate by $16,000. This month, we did all the transfers for the year to all the other funds, except for the general fund. We did transfer $1 million to the general fund, and we still have about $8.6 million more to go to transfer to the general fund to meet all the transfer obligations for the year. Moving on to the statement of cash receipts and disbursements. We have a couple funds in the negative. Two of them are the familiar ones, the FEMA fund, which is for the flood mitigation on 14th, 15th, and Arthur. Once we expend the money, we can turn in for reimbursement. The next one is CDBG, that's our federal HUD program. Once we do the expenditures, we can seek reimbursement for that. And then the last fund in the negative is the health insurance fund, Fund 660. And that's only in the negative due to the encumbrances outstanding. We took out the PO for the full year of healthcare, so that is why that is in the negative. As we go along throughout the year, that negative number will get smaller and we'll get back to being a positive. Looking at the last 3 months of activity, the general fund is down by about $400,000. A lot of that has to deal with the encumbrances outstanding went up. They went up by about $800,000. That was offset by our receipts being up by about $400,000. So that's why it went down about $400,000. Special revenue funds is down due to, once again, encumbrances outstanding. And that one also, the disbursements are up compared to previous months. Enterprise funds, they are down as well by about $300,000. Once again, it's a combination of the encumbrances outstanding and the expenditures just being up a little bit compared to the previous months. And then all other funds, you'll notice it took a big dive, but like I said, that's due to the encumbrance for the healthcare payments that we have to make to Summit County to be a part of that program. That will get out of the negative. Probably, if I had to guess, over the next month or two, it will get out of the negative and be a positive number once again. Looking at prior year to current year, you'll notice the general fund is down compared to last year at this time by about $2.8 million. Few things into that. I mean, 2021 at this time last year, we were still using the money that we saved from police and fire wages that we used for the Summit County CARES Act money and our CARES Act money that we received. So we were still using that. But another thing to point out is the encumbrances. The encumbrances are up $800,000 compared to last year at this time. Expenses are up this year compared to last year. So just a combination of those things is why that fund balance is down compared to the same time last year. Special revenue funds went up. Most of that has to deal with the ARPA funds. Enterprise funds has stayed about the same. All other funds, you'll see that it is actually not in the negative as much. And a lot of that has to deal with encumbrances, not as much this year. Our expenses are down compared to last year and our revenues are up. So with that, that's all I have. Any questions? Yes, Mr.
Yeah, Mr. Flaker, on the FEMA, for the Arthur and 14th Street?
Yes.
Is there a deadline on that for us to spend the money?
I'm not sure right off the top of my head.
There is a deadline. I want to say, I hate saying without having the confirmation, but I believe 14th Street is later this fall.
Okay,
And 15th Street and Arthur is next.
okay. Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you, Director. Do I have a motion to call for the approval?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And with that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you, and we are adjourned at 6:29.
Thank you, Mr. Heidick. That concludes our committee meetings for this evening. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and we'll come back and begin the regular legislative meeting. No, not the one for February. Yeah, so since he read it out. Okay. I knew it seemed a bit behind.
Hey, Carol, that meeting tomorrow at 11, yeah, I'm going to probably have to leave by,
Ooh, fancy.
it's only going to be an hour, okay, yeah. Here, Butch already told me.
What's up, gentlemen? Thank you for coming. Are you guys doing the pledge tonight? Are you guys doing the pledge tonight, or are you guys just hanging out?
I was gonna remind you tonight.
You guys don't need them, right? You don't need the badge.
I have 3 different calendars.
Okay.
She said the 12th and the 13th. So.
You need the community service, or well then, while you're here, let's do that. You guys both want to just lead the Pledge of Allegiance then?
Yeah, it's not gonna.
So, after, when I call the meeting to order, you guys would just step up to that opening door, step in front of it, like on the carpet, and get up here, start the pledge when everybody's ready,
Right.
and everybody will follow behind you. And then that way, if you ever need to check that box, it's checked, or if you want me to check it for you. But,
I knew the one.
all right.
So I told Tammy, and the prosecutor wanted to, call me, and I can talk.
That information?
And she said, Lena.
That's public.
So we only worked on it. I've been working on this for 7 years. She said, no, it's all out there.
You know what? They probably wouldn't show.
No, he probably won. He didn't show before. And they had a good dashboard out for him.
Yeah,
It's like a joke, you know?
since you don't
I mean,
have
with those
planning.
types.
Yeah, the revenue's 8 now, it's 7.9 or 7.8, I think.
Well, and I don't even know.
I just couldn't recall, that's why I asked.
You know, I'm just gonna, I did get on their website.
You can bring it
See what
up.
kind of programs they had, and actually they don't have any, but they are gonna have like a housing, like,
You can say you have it, and if anybody would like to see it before your next committee meeting.
but it's not on there. So it's gonna have to, like, to come up.
I guess,
I wanted to talk about it because
it won't be voted on tonight. It can't. It has to go 7 days. It was just called out of committee today. So there's time. Yeah. Is that what you're thinking? Like, hurry up and get this out to everybody? Oh, I got it. Yeah, no. If it's called out of committee that night, you can't vote on it unless you suspend the rules so it'll be another 2 weeks. Yeah. So there's plenty of time if you want to send everybody, or you can say it at the remarks that you've just seen that you had this. Anybody want information on it before? Or you can just say you'll have it in your planning committee meeting. Whatever you want. Whatever you want.
He was all for it, so I wasn't sure, but he usually checks emails and you usually forward the flag.
Oh, very simple. Bob at barbertonherald.com.
Everything else going pretty good? How's Snyder Town?
Still writing them up.
That's it.
I got 2 more houses I got eight houses now that we sent notifications.
Yeah, it's,
I mean, it's awesome. We did get, some of the people put parking on the street up there, big trouble on Bell Street. But, I mean, it's just,
We have, did you see we have?
the streets. Got potholes on George Street, I turned that in, they haven't been, I haven't seen them out there in a while. You know, last week or something.
I'm gonna wait until they get done.
it's bad. The roads are getting worse.
Some of the, they will do Van Buren.
Do you want me, but the notes, yeah, for the minutes, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Heffel's neighbor, the young lawyer nurse, he was a nurse first and then that's why he was overseas, was as a nurse. Yeah, he says, can we do something about the speeding on my street? And I'm like,
What, he's been going?
gone, no, this man's been gone. And he come back and he says, I know you know who I am, I'm Mrs. Heffel's neighbor. And I bought the house and I'm almost done with construction. And then he says, and I bought this.
How many acres is that, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's gonna look great.
Oh, Barberton Tree. Oh, they're great people. I met them.
I think
years ago.
it's gonna be great for the city.
Yeah, I met the sister.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely. They're gonna.
They got a couple local guys I know working for them. They hire local guys that might couldn't work anyplace else. Yeah. They're good.
Before we had one gentleman who was for parking, this beats it by 1,000%.
I'm not asking for all of it.
Thank you.
And you know something else too, some of that property, I know you look at it as commercial, but you can't get what you think you can get for it. You know, it's all about location. In Barberton, I'm not putting this down, I was born here. But I know it's a little bit cheaper for some of the commercial than if I would go in Cuyahoga Falls. You know, we have to understand that. And for people like that, you have to go ahead and, you know, don't just
Raymond
give it
runs
away.
into garden.
But, you know, give
So
them
is that the one you're doing? 'Cause that's.
give them a break at it.
Oh, okay, all three, okay, because that's bad. Yeah.
Big comment.
Yeah, I asked Justin, I was like, I didn't know if I should bring this up because I found it after.
But yeah, that's gonna be good.
And then I'll bring it.
The only person to ask him is the neighbors, Cole, the guy who's here at that meeting, who's the owner, next door. That's
You can read it today.
You met him.
For pulling the ordinance, we just
That's
got
a,
reading
that's a
it,
dangerous thing to say.
right?
I've got clout.
No,
No, well, I know, but you should say I don't, because the requests that you get, I mean, if somebody would hear you say that, they'd be like, well, yes, it is.
No, I tell him, I say, I will report,
No way.
and I will get back to you when they get back to me.
Throw them out and tell them, we gotta have this
Yeah, we
for it.
don't have any
And
problem.
it'll stay vacant for another
If
20,
something
30
happens,
years. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
probably already
It's a no-brainer.
Chocolate. Your ward?
No more than what I'm just doing.
I'll be smacking
I
my
looked
lips.
up there at your buddy's, standing outside in the windows.
Yeah.
You know, I haven't seen anybody's business doing this. So.
Well, you know what,
I
and I can tell that because they had
Weather, yeah.
and nothing happened.
Yeah, he's, remember the signs? Back there the signs.
For a year,
Yeah,
All right, we're gonna get started here.
right. Yeah. okay.
Before we begin this meeting, just remind everybody to silence your phones or turn them off. Ensure your microphones are on. All right, this is a regular legislative meeting of Barberton City Council. It is Monday, March 14th, 2022. It is 6:40 PM. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance led by Troop 101.
It's April 11th.
Oh, so- April 11th.
April 11th.
For the record.
He said it was
By the-
March.
And we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance, Troop 101, followed by the invocation with Mrs. Fry.
Everybody can stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Heavenly Father, thank you for the many blessings you have bestowed on all of us. As we witness unconscionable acts happening around our world, let us pray that you intervene to guide our leaders in making the best decisions to solve the many social problems. Please protect all our brave military personnel and first responders. Help all who are in leadership positions to turn to you for guidance regarding which actions will provide the best solutions for all. Provide strength and courage to Ukraine as they fight to protect their freedom, and let all of us keep them in our prayers. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Mrs. Fry. Thank you, Troop 101. If I wasn't dyslexic enough, now dates are starting to blend together. Clerk, please call the roll.
Okay, President Greer.
Present.
Mrs. Thompson.
Here.
Mr. Heidick.
Here.
Mrs. Bailey.
Here.
Mrs. Angela.
Here.
Mr. Griffin.
Here.
Mr. Jaber.
Here.
Mrs. Coburn.
Here.
Mrs. Fry.
Here.
Thank you. Approval of the minutes. Approval of the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held Monday, March 28th, 2022, as presented. Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the approval of the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, March 28th, 2022, as presented.
Thank you. Mrs. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Fry's motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you. It was moved by Mrs. Fry and seconded by Mrs. Thompson to approve the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, March 28th, 2022, as presented. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are adopted. Acceptance of the finance report for the month of March 2022, as presented. Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the acceptance of the Finance Department report for the month of March 2022 as presented.
Thank you. Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to second that motion for acceptance of the finance report.
Thank you. It was moved by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to accept the finance report for the month of March 2022 as presented. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Finance report is adopted. Petitions and claims.
We have none.
Thank you. Matters requested.
They've all been dispersed.
Citizens addressing council.
There are none.
Thank you, Mrs. Angela. First readings of ordinances and resolutions.
Ordinance number 41, 2022, presented by Mr. Heidick. Title, Create New Fund, One Ohio Fund. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Finance to create a new fund, the One Ohio Fund, and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend. Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton State Charter be suspended.
Thank you. And Ms. Coburn?
Thank you, Mr. President. I second that motion for suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Heidick,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 41, 2022.
Thank you. Ms.
Thank you,
Coburn?
Mr. President. I would like to second Mr. Heidick's motion for adoption.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to adopt ordinance number 41-2022. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Heidick,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Resolution number 42, 2022, presented by Mrs. Fry. Title Commendation. Captain Richard A. Schwenning. A resolution of the Council of the City of Barberton to honor and give public recognition to Captain Richard A. Schwenning for his 33 years of dedicated service to this city as a member of the Barberton Fire Department.
Is this an emergency? All right. Motion to suspend. Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. Mr. Griffin.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Fry and seconded by Mr. Griffin to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Bailey,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Heidick,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Motion to adopt. Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of resolution number 42-2022.
Thank you. Mr. Griffin.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on adoption.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Fry and seconded by Mr. Griffin to adopt resolution number 42-2022. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Heidick,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries for adoption.
Ordinance number 43, 2022, presented by Mrs. Coburn. Title, Utilities Assessment Delinquent Water. An ordinance authorizing and directing the city of Barberton to certify to the Summit County Auditor special assessments against certain properties for unpaid utility services, which will include accounts more than 60 days past due and will include charges due August 26, 2022.
Again, is this emergency wording? Just clarifying. Motion to suspend. Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Coburn's motion to suspend.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Coburn and seconded by Mrs. Fry to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mr. Heidick,
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Motion to adopt. Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 43, 2022.
Thank you. Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Coburn's motion to adopt ordinance number 43, 2022.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Coburn and seconded by Mrs. Fry to adopt ordinance number 43-2022. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey,
Yes.
Mr. Heidick,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion for adoption carries.
Ordinance number 44, 2022, presented by Mrs. Thompson. Title, zoning map amendment, 105 West State Street. An ordinance authorizing the rezoning of 105 West State Street, parcel number 01.16769, from RS40 Single Family Detached to C3 Community Center Commercial. This will go for 3 readings.
Thank you.
Ordinance number 45, 2022, presented by Mr. Heidick. Title, enter into contract, Summit County. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a 5-year contract with Summit County for the renewal of the Matrix Prosecutorial Case Management System contract in the amount of $81,600, which is $16,320 per year.
And if my understanding that this will be amended on the floor tonight?
Yes, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion to amend this to add emergency language.
Would you? A motion, is there a second?
I'll make that second.
Thank you, Mrs. Coburn. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to amend ordinance number 45-2022 to add emergency wording. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Well,
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Will we be reading this again?
Ordinance number 45, 2022, presented by Mr. Heidick. Title, enter into contract, Summit County. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a 5-year contract with Summit County for the renewal of the Matrix Prosecutorial Case Management System contract in the amount of $81,600, which is $16,320 per year, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Motion to suspend, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. Mrs. Coburn?
Thank you, Mr. President. I second that motion for suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Frye?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 45, 2022.
Thank you. Mrs. Coburn?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll second that motion for adoption.
I'm sorry. You got to add as amended?
Oh, I'm sorry.
You want to redo that motion?
Yes, I will make a motion to adopt ordinance number 45, 2022 as amended.
Thank you. And Mrs. Coburn?
I'll second that motion to adopt as amended.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to adopt ordinance number 45-2022 as amended. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mrs. Frye?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion for adoption carries.
Ordinance 46, 2022, presented by Mr. Heidick. Title, Settlement Agreement. An ordinance requesting retroactive approval legislation to enter into a settlement agreement with Giant Eagle Pharmacy and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Motion to suspend. Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second that motion for suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mrs. Frye?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Motion to adopt. Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 46, 2022.
Thank you. Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll second that motion for adoption.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to adopt ordinance number 46-2022. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Motion for adoption carries.
Ordinance number 47, 2022, presented by Mr. Heidick. Title, rescinding ordinance number 32, 2022. An ordinance rescinding ordinance number 32, 2022, titled Appropriation, American Rescue, and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. Mrs. Coburn?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll second that motion for a suspension.
Thank you. The motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 47, 2022.
Thank you. Mrs. Coburn?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll second the motion for adoption.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to adopt ordinance number 47-2022. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Motion for adoption carries.
Ordinance number 48-2022, presented by Mr. Heidick, titled Non-Bargaining Personnel Policy. An ordinance amending ordinance number 173, 2017, to achieve parity with the bargaining units for personal days and holidays and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Mrs. Coburn?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll second that motion for suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 48, 2022.
Thank you. Mrs. Coburn?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll second the motion for adoption.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to adopt ordinance number 48-2022. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion for adoption carries.
Ordinance number 49, 2022, presented by Mrs. Fry. Title, Fireworks. An ordinance addressing the provisions of amended substitute House Bill 172 concerning the right of municipalities to retain the regulations and prohibitions on the discharge, ignition, and exploding of fireworks that existed prior to the enactment of amended substitute House Bill 172 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Motion to suspend, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. Mr. Griffin?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Fry and seconded by Mr. Griffin to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 49-2022.
Thank you. Mr. Griffin?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on adoption.
Thank you. The motion was made by Mrs. Fry and seconded by Mr. Griffin to adopt ordinance number 49-2022. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries for adoption.
Ordinance number 50, 2022, presented by Mr. Jaber. Title, enter into contract Tim Lally Chevrolet Incorporated. An ordinance authorizing the city of Barberton to enter into contract with Tim Lally Chevrolet Incorporated in the amount of $52,185.82 for the purchase of a new 2023 Chevy Silverado 3500 dump truck to be used for general parks maintenance issues and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Motion to suspend, Mr. Jaber.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the rules as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. Mr. Heidick?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second Counselor Jaber's motion on suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Jaber and seconded by Mr. Heidick to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion to adopt, Mr. Jaber.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move the adoption of ordinance number 50-2022.
Thank you. Mr. Heidick?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second Counselor Jaber's motion on adoption.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Jaber and seconded by Mr. Heidick to adopt ordinance number 50-2022. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion for adoption carries.
Ordinance number 51, 2022, presented by Mr. Heidick. Title, Transfer American Rescue Plan. An ordinance transferring $1 million from the operations and maintenance budget to the personal service budget within the American Rescue Plan Grant Fund and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Motion to suspend, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. Mrs. Coburn?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second the motion for suspension on ordinance number 51, 2022.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion to adopt. Mr. Heidick?
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 51, 2022.
Thank you. Mrs. Coburn?
I'll second the motion for adoption.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to adopt ordinance number 51-2022. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion for adoption carries.
Ordinance number 52, 2022, presented by Mr. Heidick. Title, Transfer American Rescue Plan, an ordinance transferring $8,743,003 from the capital budget to the personal service budget within the American Rescue Plan Grant Fund and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Motion to suspend, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. Mrs. Coburn?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mr. Heidick's motion for suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 52, 2022.
Thank you. Mrs. Coburn?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll second that motion for adoption.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to adopt ordinance number 52-2022. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
This ends the first readings.
Thank you. Motion for adoption carries on that. Second readings of ordinances and resolutions.
Ordinance 38, 2022, presented by Mr. Heidick. Title, Appropriation Building Maintenance Fund. An ordinance appropriating $65,000 from the unappropriated item of the general fund to the building maintenance fund to address the leak in the roof above council chambers and the planning department and declaring an emergency. This will go for 3 readings or until all estimates are obtained. The first reading was March 28, 2022.
Thank you. Third readings of ordinances and resolutions.
There are none.
Miscellaneous and unfinished business. I would like to entertain a motion to excuse Councilman Heidick from the March 28, 2022 regular legislative meeting. Is there a motion? Ms. Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion to excuse Councilman Heidick for the March 28th, 2022 regular legislative meeting.
Thank you. And is there a second?
I will second Mrs. Thompson's motion.
Thank you. It was motioned by Mrs. Thompson and seconded by Mrs. Fry to excuse Councilman Heidick for the regular legislative meeting that was held on March 28th, 2022. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain,
Thank you.
since I'm actually here for the vote.
All right, Mr. Heidick, you are excused from March 28th regular legislative meeting. Is there anything from the body? Council members, department heads, Ms. Fry?
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to tell anyone that hadn't gotten a chance to read Mr. Moorhead's article that was in the the Barberton Herald for last week, that it was really good. And the title of it is something along the lines of "There is no limitless pot." And it goes on to explain how everybody thinks that their street should be done and for one reason or another, and I just thought it was really, really a good article, and maybe you could pick something out of it to use when you are talking to your constituents.
Oh, yeah.
With that, I will pass.
Thank you, Mrs. Fry. Is there anything else from council members, department heads? Nada? All right, communications from the mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I want to thank you, gentlemen, for coming today and leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Second, kind of going along with Councilwoman Fry, Mr. Moorhead's article, we knew when Issue 8 passed back in 2013 that there would come a day when people would go from complaining about the roads to complaining about, well, their road hasn't gotten done yet. And I'll talk to people, and they'll say, well, tell me what roads have been done. And I'll say, well, this road, that road, well, those are on the other side of town. I don't use those roads. Okay. So we put a lot of time and effort into our road program. Back then in 2013, the estimate for just a mill and fill, not road reconstruction, but a mill and fill, was about $15 to $17 million to do all the streets in town. Over time, that cost is almost triple. We've leveraged more money through this program than the city's ever seen before, and a lot of it has been approved but just hasn't been released yet. And we've done just, what people have to understand is a lot of the streets, the side streets, the residential streets, is asphalt on dirt. So there is no solid base there. So that's why when you see a pothole start to form on some of these side roads, these residential streets, it's going right to the dirt. You know, the streets, but if you do the research, the streets back in the day were just all cinders. And then they would spray it with oil to kind of lock it in. Well, and then at some point, they just put asphalt on top of that. So they never really dug down and put a full base, which is common now when you put in a development. So I appreciate the story. I hope you get positive feedback on it. But I think that there's a lot that has to be just the education on roads, not only what goes into the road program, but the damage that the winter does. And I've always joked that, you know, we should open up an asphalt plant, but also a salt mine, because when you throw salt on the street for the ice, it tears up the asphalt. So, you know, you're kind of doing both. You know, we'll pave your roads, but then we're going to tear them up with salt. So there's a lot that goes into that. And I'm more than willing to sit down. I've got a presentation that I've been working on for the public about the roads and what we've done over the last few years since Issue 8 passed. So hope to get that up and put together, finish that up and have that presented in front of the public here in the next few months here. Change for Change will be on Friday, April 22nd at Block 7, benefiting victim assistance from 4:30 to 7 if you can stop out. I've been working for a while now on the DORA, and so we're still working on that. Working on right now creating the downtown outdoor refreshment area map and making sure that we've got enough acreage to meet the state law, but not too much. So putting that map together, finishing the application, and that application, once completed, will come to City Council for final approval. Then we've got to send that on to the state and get approval from there before we can actually institute it. And on the other side, we have to make sure that our sanitation plan, that we've got enough trash barrels out there, that we've got signage, that we've got clear markers for all the shops, because every shop gets one. You know, you're participating, you're not participating, but you'll allow people in with drinks. So everyone gets some type of sticker. So I did pass this through the Merchants Association and bounced it off of some others in downtown, but we're redoing it. So the final product, I want to get kind of all the boxes checkmarked before it comes to final with City Council. So been going back and forth with Councilman Heidig, who has great knowledge on the liquor permitting, which is a whole other world, but he knows that. I don't know if you have any additional comments.
The only thing is, when something like this is created, you have to have X amount of licenses. When you actually see it and you see the A class and D classes, A classes are like Ignite that are manufacturing. So that's kind of a weird one to see, because we usually see D's and C's, which is the commercial ones, and the actual bar ones. Like he said, working with the mayor with different map ideas, different where they can go, where they can't, what's kind of wasted, even by boundary lines, cut that at the expense to add additional space elsewhere, just so it makes sense that our security can be better. We don't have a wasted spot where people could just be walking for no apparent reason. It's a process. I have the whole outline of everything here, and the things, when it finally comes to light and comes to council, there'll be a lot of work that's put into it and a lot of detail that has to be. So any questions once it comes up, the mayor could answer, I could help answer, but it looks like it could be a very good reality that could really benefit.
And we've looked at, for example, we've looked at them from, Dublin to Columbus to Canal Fulton, Canton, the small cities, larger cities. Some of them have instituted something and then kind of tested it, and they came back and made revisions on either the size of the map, the location, the hours, things of that nature. So this is a new venture, and every community is a little different. So want to pass something through council, get it instituted, monitor it, and then make changes as needed. So, yes.
I have a question. I saw him going through papers. Are those the papers that we were given originally, or there's lots more now? Because we were given some information on the DORA quite a while ago.
Yeah, this is from the Department of Commerce's website that details the procedure, the process,
Yeah.
what has to be included.
That's the same thing we
Yeah.
were all
Okay.
getting back.
Yep.
in the
I just
beginning.
wondered. I'll read it now. I probably read it before, but
It was a year ago.
yeah. Oh, longer than that, I think.
Yeah, if you
Before
remember
COVID.
20,
Yeah,
it
we
was a long
started
time
Their
with
ago.
comments were, let's take a year to, because a lot of work's got to go into it, take a year to put everything together and then pass something. It's taking a little longer, just
Well,
Yeah.
COVID.
And it wasn't 2020 because with COVID shutting everything down.
Right.
That was the time when we could really start the initial discussions, since couldn't really do much anyway.
And we've been waiting for some state laws to be passed and kind of ironed out as well, so.
Okay, I just wanted to know.
That final approval, it'll go to the law director, it'll come then to city council, then to the state, so. Any other questions on that? Okay, and then just finally, we're still working with the applications for ARPA funds and working through that process. I'm working on a dashboard for council that I will update on a monthly basis. So I believe only one item that's been approved has been completed, and that was the premium pay. They're still working on the equipment for the active adult center. They've got that, I'd say, 99% done. Mr. Patterson's passenger bus, the ambulance, that's going to take a year or so. So the build out is ongoing. So only one has actually been completed, but we've got a lot of those things in the pipeline. So you may have seen in the paper today, we're continuing to work with Summit County on the fiber and broadband. So I jotted down some notes here. So they get a separate allocation of ARPA money. And I believe we're the only county in the state that is talking about this and working together of spending their money to build this fiber ring. So they're going to spend $35 million of ARPA money to construct a 125-mile fiber optic ring, owned by Summit County, operated by the City of Fairlawn. It will connect all 31 communities within the county here and support the county's emergency radio system, dispatch centers, virtual core platforms, and internet service to all the communities in the county. We'll bring it to our front door. $20 million in county money for the design and construction of a new data center in Fairlawn to service that network. Then another $20 million in ARPA money for community broadband investments to support the delivery of broadband to underserved areas in the county, which Barberton is one of them. So, there's all this money floating around. There's been a lot of work at the county level to get to this point. So we're continuing with those discussions with them. Fiber and broadband in Barberton. We've been talking about Wi-Fi downtown, Wi-Fi in neighborhoods for quite a while. This is the first opportunity that we have to actually get it citywide. And this is a game changer for the city. Game changer for the county. There's been some businesses that have moved to Fairlawn because of their gig, with no tax incentives, just because they have the gig. So you talk about the safety industry, you talk about the health industry, manufacturing, everything is being more and more computerized, and fiber just makes things faster. And that's why I want to come to council with legislation on any road reconstruction project that it's automatic that conduit gets run. We're doing that on South Van Buren. And there's a few other communities that already had that legislation on the books. So, this is something that, there's a lot of great projects that will come from ARPA, but this is one that we'll definitely look back in 20 years and say, yep, that was the right choice. But we haven't made that choice yet because there's several different models that we have to choose from. So those are still kind of being worked out. And then there's, what's the operational cost? What's the maintenance cost? What's the time frame to implement this? So there's still a lot of unanswered questions, but there's still a lot of work that's already been done. So we're kind of in the middle pattern there. So clear as mud?
Very much.
Any questions?
Mayor, I do have a question. When that broadband comes in here, and I may have missed this at that Commerce meeting, but is the community, the municipality able to charge a fee to connect to that, or is that all that fee go to Fairlawn or county?
So several different models. One model is that we could, through city council action, create a utility and just charge kind of like on the water bill for that service. So that is an option.
Okay.
So we could go with Fairlawn. We could go with another provider. So yeah, just a lot of different models out there. All right, that's all I have.
Thank you, Mayor. With nothing else, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Heidick.
I'll second.
Thank you. A motion was made, or it was moved by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Thompson that we adjourn. Are all those in favor signify by saying aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Didn't think so. This meeting is adjourned at 7:18 PM.